This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 316 of the Craft Beer Brewing Podcast, and for this episode, I'm continuing my road trips around the West. I don't know what I got the bug this year to go hit some road trips. So I went out to Salt Lake City, went down to Colorado Springs. Now I drove north. I'm up in Billings, Montana, and joining me for this episode of the podcast is my good friend and old friend now, Mark Hastings of Überbrew. And by all means, welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to have you in Billings. Been wanting you to come up for a long time, so thanks for making the trip.
I think we've talked about doing this for years and years, and either the circumstances were right or I always wanted to come up and see it. And I haven't been in the state of Montana. I've only was in the state of Montana once, and it was 25 years ago, and it was on a Yellowstone trip, and I just have never. It's kind of nice to hop up 25 north all the way up here. Beautiful, beautiful country. And here we are.
Yeah. I used to see a lot more when we'd travel to Colorado more, but I haven't been doing as much. So
that's true. There was a point where you were doing a little bit of contract brewing down in Fort Collins. And so you'd come down and we'd hang out and get some beers when you were in town. And anyway, it's when I get here to by all means, it is an impressive thing that you guys have been, you've built out here. And it's great to see it in person. It's a beautiful, beautiful brew pub.
Yeah, thank you. We took a lot of time and planned it, and it's nice to finally see it going. I guess we're about almost 4 years in.
Yeah. And so by all means, an Überbrew are, sisters or brothers or cousins or however you want to define the familial relationship. The Überbrew beer is now brewed here in the by all means brew house. Yes. And so it's kind of a unified approach.
Yeah. Maybe 6 months before COVID, we brought Überbrew production home to Montana and started making it all here at by all means. 200 barrel batches were a bit large for our distribution. And so, we're doing white noise in 60 barrel batches, and it's about the perfect size for us.
Makes a lot of sense. For those that are not familiar, Überbrew, 11 GABF medals, 5 of those are gold. In particular, you've got just some perennial winners, medal winners. The White Noise American Wheat Beer, World Beer Cup Silver in 2014, GABF Gold in 2016, GABF Silver in 2021, GABF Gold last year in 2022. For an American wheat beer. We are absolutely going to talk about that on the podcast today. And then on the other side of the coin, your Alpha Force Double Tap Black IPA, one under a different name, GABF Silver in 2014, one Alpha King in 2015. And to my knowledge, that might be the only black IPA that's ever won Alpha King. Kind of cool. GABF Bronze in 2016, and then back-to-back GABF Golds in 2018 and 19. You've got some franchise beers here, Mark, and are doing some amazing and consistently amazing stuff with some of those things. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the other things that you've done, even shifting to using more Montana-grown malt in the way that you brew these things, including in that White Noise American Wheat Beer. Before we do that, G&D Chillers, the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, are proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Want to maximize efficiency in your chiller? G&D's microchannel condensers are designed for less power draw. Their lighter weight, more compact design uses up to 70% less refrigerant, which means they lower GWP and lower operating costs. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. Also, support for this episode comes from BSG, looking for a sustainable way to increase fermenter capacity. Try FermCap Eco from Carey. Developed as part of Carey's Eco Brewing range, FermCap Eco is a plant-based alternative to traditional silicone-based products. FermCap Eco increases fermenter capacity by reducing foam height to improve beer foam stability and enhance hop utilization. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact your BSG sales rep to get started. And is your brewery making its own ciders, seltzers, and other beverages beyond beer? If you need a central source for fruit flavor, Old Orchard has you covered. Old Orchard supplies flavored craft juice concentrate blends to beverage brands for the production of beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, kombucha, and more. Flavor your lineup and streamline your sourcing by heading on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. And just before we started this, Mark was mentioning they've got some Old Orchard stuff in the tank right now that they are trying out. Kind of fun to see how that experimentation goes.
Yeah, we're centrifuging a beer with that product in it, and we're super excited about it. Heard about it right here on your podcast, so we're excited to try it.
I appreciate that. So, Mark, give me your brewing story. That's how we normally kick these things off. What's that arc through brewing that you have followed? Because you've been doing this for a lot of years now.
Yeah, professionally since '94. A couple years of home brewing before that, and so I did some coursework at UC Davis and followed Todd Scott around Spanish Peaks and Bozeman on spring breaks and weekends, and picked up as much as I could, and got my first job at Montana Brewing Company in '94. Montana Brewing Company was going to be a Black Dog Ale House, and the partners didn't quite see eye to eye, and so the remaining partners opened Montana Brewing Company, and with that relationship with Spanish Peaks, my name got passed on. So I started as an assistant brewer there, and by late '95, I was the head brewer, and I think in '96, we brought on an assistant brewer. '98, we started winning some awards. And so I was there for a little while. Went to work for another Montana brewery called Sleeping Giant, not the Sleeping Giant that we've worked with in Colorado, but worked with them, went back to Montana Brewing Company, and took a little hiatus, managed some restaurants while we wrote the business plan for Überbrew. And so Überbrew is about 11 years old. And that's kind of my passion project. That's what I was striving to do when I was a home brewer, like all home brewers, and finally got to do it. And by all means, it's just kind of an expansion of all that. It's like you said, a sibling brewery to the Überbrew brand, and so super excited to be doing both projects. So '94 was when it all started.
OG. So as you came up with this idea, worked on this plan for Überbrew, what was the idea? And then of course with By All Means, which is kind of I think in a similar kind of progressive, forward-looking beer vein. And we should couch this by saying, I was in Montana Brewing Company last night. They are a very classic focused craft brewery. Some of those beers feel like I was back in the 90s drinking craft beer, because I started drinking craft beer in 1995, and that just is kind of what it felt like. By All Means and Überbrew are a different approach to brewing and a more maybe something more modern focused in a lot of ways. But what was it about as you were trying to formulate these ideas behind Überbrew and then By All Means, what talk to me about the driving kind of creative vision for them.
Yeah, back in the '90s, brewers were emulating old world styles, and maybe the newness was just adding more hops and North American varieties, but for the most part, we were trying to emulate, English bitters and pale ales, and in a lot of ways, that's still the market here in Billings, Montana.
There's a lot of Scottish ale, amber ale, and other stuff.
You got to make a good Scotch or Scottish in Montana for sure. But we wanted to take it beyond that. We wanted to experiment a little bit. And, I don't know how much we were involved, but there's definitely a period of time when the European brewers started emulating North American beer, especially hoppy styles, IPA, and so inspiration for us was coming out of California and eventually Colorado, but we think the Mountain States was maybe led a little bit in IPA by Montana, and we think there's a real similarity amongst IPA in the Mountain States, and we think it's different than West Coast, East Coast, hazy, Pacific Northwest, but we call it Rocky Mountain IPA, and we wanted to be part of that. And I think that's kind of where IPA still is in Montana. But Überbrew came because 11 years ago, everybody was naming their brewery after something geological or geographical. A lot of fuzzy mammal names, a lot of rivers and mountain peaks, and we wanted to do something a little different. So Überbrew for us was kind of our business plan or our vision, our mission statement in a name. And so we were looking to make superlative beer. So Uber being a superlative example of its class or kind, and beer being or brew being the fermented beverage. We wanted a name that would go beyond Billings, Montana. And we wanted it to maybe have meaning outside of the state, or at least outside of Billings. And so that was the plan. And we wanted beer to kind of go with it. We wanted beer to be something beyond what the 1990s was.
If you didn't win awards, then the brand wouldn't.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of in the way that you've set up the entire brand name. If it doesn't get that kind of recognition, then it's not living up to the brand. It was setting a high bar for yourself that way.
Yeah. If you look at what Überbrew means here in Billings, Montana, we're known more for the tap room, the food. It was those awards and meeting brewers outside of our market where we kind of became known for the beer. And so, like you say, without meeting passionate beer people that were looking for beer outside of what the 1990s brought, people probably wouldn't know about Überbrew.
At the same time, I think that the same dynamic happens, and Billings isn't a small town. It's 110,000 population, the largest city in Montana, but it still feels insular. I mean, it's still a long drive to anywhere else, from here. You're still a couple hours just from Sheridan, Wyoming, and, not to mention most other places in the country, but the way that a local market looks at you when you come back with national accolades is extra special in a place like this, where people don't think about special things that happen on a world stage as being right here and available to them in their backyard.
Yeah, and we've been doing it before Überbrew. So you were at Montana Brewing last night. You probably saw all those awards on the wall. Those were all predecessors to White Noise and some of the beer we're doing today. And so Montana is, for a small population, a small state, has a lot of World Beer Cup and a lot of GABF awards, and a lot of it, more than any other town in Montana. They're right here in Billings, Montana. So a lot of people we've worked with over the years have helped bring some of those to Billings. Interestingly
enough, it's this smaller population of Wyoming relative to the number of breweries that make it one of the most. The state has one of the most, Montana and Vermont have the most breweries per capita,
right,
of any states in the country. So there are more breweries per capita here in Montana than there are, in any other state other than maybe Vermont. People are definitely drinking craft beer here. There is plenty for people to drink. Of course, you then went and started winning awards for a black IPA, a style that no matter how many awards you win, is still going to be somewhat focused, in the audience for that. And so I want to kick things off and talk about, how you approach that, taking in some of this West Coast hop idea, melding that with, your own palate, and being able to formulate this idea for a black IPA that also sculpturally conveys, this hop idea. Before we do that, AccuBrew now monitors specific gravity to ensure consistent results and detect problems before they ruin a batch. The AccuBrew system is designed to give you unprecedented insight into the fermentation process. Monitor gravity, fermentation activity, clarity and temperature, schedule reminders, and receive alerts anywhere, anytime. AccuBrew's CIP-ready device is designed to stay out of your way. They know your time and space is precious, and they take up as little of both as possible. No more samples, no cleaning, and no calibration. Set it and forget it. To learn more about AccuBrew, head on over to accubrew.io. Also, brewing is currently one of the most innovative, adaptive, and fast-paced industries in the world. With consumer demand shifting to the latest and greatest trend, it can be difficult for production teams to keep up with requirements. The ProFill series of rotary can fillers from ProBrew are accelerating plant production everywhere. These can fillers run at speeds between 100 and 600 plus cans per minute while achieving precise and consistent filling volumes not achievable by most inline and mobile fillers. For more information, visit www.probrew.com or email contact us at probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. And elevate your brewing game with RMS Roller Grinder. Their industry-leading mills deliver optimal grind consistency, unlocking the full potential of your grain. Say goodbye to uneven grinds and hello to exceptional flavor extraction. Brew pub or production facility, RMS has the expertise and grain handling equipment to meet your needs. Visit rmsroller-grinder.com to discover how RMS can transform your brewing experience. Unleash the full potential of your grains with RMS Roller Grinder, the trusted choice for brewers worldwide. So let's talk about Black IPA, Mark. It's not a subject we talk about much here on the podcast, but it is one of those things that, again, even though I might have it in my mind that it's not, a beer that I'm going to order as often, every time I have it, or every time I, say get a Firestone Walker Wookie Jack, I come back to it, it's like, God, I really do love Black IPA, well-made Black IPA, and I think in this kind of current and modern environment, you all have figured out a way to smooth out that hops character, blend it in, with this, this kind of darker malt base. So talk me through this beer. As you thinking about designing Black IPA, where does your creative process start on that?
So the idea was very early on in Überbrew's startup phases. And, back then the discussion was, what do you call this beer? It was it Black IPA? Was it Cascadian? And, we like those debates. And, for us, it's not Cascadian because we're in Montana. We understand that, how
Yellowstonian dark ale.
Right. How can something be pale and black at the same time? So that just piqued our interest, that debate. And, there were some good ones. So there's a couple shout outs that I have to give to people that inspired us and helped us bring that beer to fruition. And first of all, it's Mike Urich at Carter's here in Billings, Montana. So we were down at GABF before Überbrew opened, and he won a silver medal with his Cascadian, and excellent beer. And so we were excited about the style. And then, of course, you mentioned Wookie Jack, and that was kind of coming to prominence right around the time Überbrew opened, and so that got our attention. But it was really Mitch Steele writing about Jeff Bagby making one at Pizza Port, where he essentially was making an IPA and using malt-based colorants, specifically Cinnamar, to make something. And so, we've made it all different ways, and the first one we made was black hops. And that was made with all dark grains. And, we did a lot of dark grains just before lauter, just sparging, to minimize the flavor impact. So we've always kind of tried to make it taste as much like an IPA as possible, but have that visual impact. And you're never going to get away from darker flavors, even using something like Cinnamar, but that's what started the evolution. And we were really getting into IPA, and this was just another IPA style. We were making white IPA with, Belgian spices, and we were making Belgian IPAs. So we were just trying to experiment with all IPAs.
I remember those years.
Yeah.
14,
Green
15.
Flash.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
13, 14, yeah.
But this one stuck out, and it was one that we knew was one of the better beers we had ever made. And so we stuck with it. And there wasn't a ton of a market for it back then. There's getting to be more of a market in Billings. You know, we heard in Colorado when we started winning with Alpha Force Double Tap that there wasn't much of a market there. But whenever we took it, people enjoyed the beer. And so we decided to start entering it in some competitions.
You're using dark malt, but then really just as a visual component or in a very small flavor kind of way. What's the bulk of a base malt for black IPA these days for you?
So I think every beer for us starts with base malt, and especially IPA, whether it be double IPA, whether it be double black IPA. And we were always using floor malted Maris Otter. We were always using low protein malts. So it was either Maris Otter or Golden Promise for us back then. And it's changed recently.
Just for that nice flavor character.
It's a base.
Fullness.
It's a base to layer hops on.
Yeah.
And, back then a lot of people were using wheat malt in IPA. They were using Munich malt in IPA, and those didn't quite make sense to us for what they were trying to achieve. And so we were just looking for a somewhat full-bodied character, but we were also looking for a beer. When you were doing big double IPAs, you wanted your lauter to be decent, and so low protein malts made a lot of sense to us. With black IPA, you want something clear, because if there's a haze associated with it, it can look kind of muddied and not visually appealing. So we were looking to A, have a nice lauter, and B, we didn't have filtration or centrifugation at Überbrew then, so we were fining everything. And we wanted a clear beer in a reasonable amount of time. So low protein malts was the direction we were going.
And then that's evolved then as of late.
So we still target low protein malts, but sometimes for different reasons. We think you can achieve some stable hazes with low protein malts in big hoppy beers. So, different finings. Is it centrifuged, which we can do now with the By All Means facility? Is it fined? What kind of finings are you using, and what's your goal? Are you looking for a nice permanent haze? And so we kind of found that you can make real stable hazy beers with a low protein malt with a lot of hops. And the idea is that, proteins are going to bind to polyphenols and make a particle large enough that you can fine it out. But if that protein's not there, there's nothing to bring those proteins and polyphenols together. So you can get a nice stable haze for hazy beers. So when we say that our IPA starts with malt, it does for almost every IPA style we brew. And we think a lot about what's the final product going to have. Are we looking for haze? Are we looking for clear? And we'll choose malt accordingly. But for us, it's almost always a low protein malt. So I'm talking less than 11.5 on protein, and as low as 9.2 for some of the European malts. But we're getting great malts like that out of Montana now. So we're starting to source some of that stuff locally.
Tell me more about that. That's interesting. Because here Montana is such a big grain growing state, but without a maltster prepping malt for the way that you as a craft brewer want to use it, it may not give you exactly what you're looking for, but you've started to find that and find malt and the kind of quality that you're looking for.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. We have always wanted to use Montana grain, since the 90s, but everything was bred, grown, and malted for the large multinationals, either here in the Yellowstone Valley. Coors and AB InBev grow, and world-class barley, but it's bred, grown, and malted for a different brew house and a different type of beer than what we make. At Überbrew, it's single-step infusion mashes, and that's part of the reason we like low protein. But we're also looking for flavor, and so you're starting to see Montana with MSU. We're starting to breed and grow and malt with some of the small-scale maltsters for flavor and aroma and brew house performance, and less about agronomy and yield. And so because of those small-scale maltsters, we finally have malt that's bred, grown, and malted here in Montana that I think competes with, the Weyermans and the Simpsons and the Crisps of the world. And so we're using more and more of it, and we're getting the barleys that we want as a great base malt for an IPA or a black IPA.
Now, you mentioned the silo out there is a Montana craft pilsner malt. Does that play a bigger role in your IPAs now? I mean, you also have super sacks of pale malt, and can switch these things up. But how much has that kind of base malt shifted? Because I mean, these days in the IPA world, there's lots of brewers now who've seen the light, literally and figuratively, and using pilsner malt as a bigger base for some of these beers.
Yeah, so we started lightening up IPAs early on at Überbrew, and so that was getting into maybe a little away from Maris Otter, which we started with, and more into Golden Promise. But we would use some Weyermann pills for some of our IPAs, and really liked the outcome. And so we've continued that. We still do that. So we just brewed a big double. We've been thinking about thiolized yeast and phantasms for about a year now for us, and it's been around longer than that. But we planned yesterday's brew for about a year and execute, and we used all Pilsner malt for that. So the companies that we're buying malt from here in Montana is Montana Craft Malt out of Butte and Gallatin Valley Malting out of Manhattan, Montana. And we started using them about almost 5 years ago now. And it's because the quality of their malt is there. And they're making low protein malts like we want to use, but the aroma and the flavor out of this world, big, bold flavors, low protein. So we have the brew house performance we want. We can play with haze and get either a clear beer or a permanent haze out of it. And we just like what they're doing. So it's been a quest of mine since the 90s to use Montana barley. And there were upstarts that didn't make it for water rights reasons and lots of different things. But I think that the number one factor that brought Montana grown malt to market in a way that we liked it was small scale equipment, that these growers could malt it themselves. So you look at Carl and June DeJong at Gallatin Valley. They've been growing seed barley for Coors forever. So their main crop is seed potatoes. So everything they grow is pure enough that it can be seed barley for Coors or seed potatoes. But they have small scale equipment now that they can practice their craft on, and their malt is dynamite. Great base for hoppy beers.
How much have you worked with those maltsters to get the specs of the malt that they make, and communicate what you need for it as a brewer? Because there's always the they need to sell to a lot of different customers, and they need to, they need to make malt in batches. They're going to be far larger than just what you're going to buy from them. So figuring out what those specs are that they need to hit to make it attractive to you as a brewer, has to be some sort of conversation, huh?
That was the big thing, is the small guys just reached out to brewers and said, what do you look for in malts? And then they went and figured out how to bring that to a product and then bring that product to market. So, they worked a lot with MSU and maltsters before that and growers before that were kind of they were asking the big guys what they wanted. They weren't asking craft what they wanted. So, they were bringing great Moravian and Harrington varieties to Coors, and they were bringing AB InBev's B1202s and in those varieties, and figuring out how to grow them and grow a lot of them. But they weren't asking craft what they wanted from malt. And I'd say, I don't know, 5-7 years ago, that kind of switched. And the Montana people were great. And, Proximity did a good job too. We really liked some of the Genie coming out of Colorado and used a little bit of that for a while. But then the Montana guys came on, and we get to say local now. So.
How much does the barley variety, which you're now talking about when you mention things like LCS Genie, and these specific barley varieties, because all of the those major brewers, Coors has their own barley varieties, AB InBev has specific barley varieties that they use. How much variation and difference do you as a brewer sense between the barley variety that's going, that's grown itself, and then, it's hard to tease these things out, right? Because you've got the variety of the barley, but that's, if you look at a hops, metaphor, it's like, okay, well, I've got Citra, but is it Idaho grown, or is it, Washington grown, or is it Oregon grown? And then from where, like, there's also the terroir impacts, that impact that on top of the variety. And then you go into, the process of the maltster on top of all of those things, that can, move that in other directions too. So, in terms of barley variety, you've spent a lot of time around this. How much variation do you sense from these things?
So, that was questions I had early on. Why can't we just bring Maris Otter and grow it in Montana? And, the soil here and the growing condition, we're more continental European type growing here in Montana. We're not the coastal growing like you'd see in the UK, but Maris Otter doesn't like the rocky soils we have here in Montana. And so that's kind of what I found out is you may like a variety, but there's a lot more to it than just the variety. It's, will it grow where you want it to grow? Can you bring it to harvest? And then malting it can be a problem too, because it grows differently. So what we're finding out is that agronomy is important, but then it's convincing the maltster to make that variety the way you want it. And so, you can control protein in the field with moisture and that sort of thing. You can work on dry land varieties and that, but it's got to grow for them to malt it. But from a brewer's perspective, the important part is what does that maltster do with it then once they have it. So if they start with a low protein malt, they still have to malt it in a way that is going to make sense for what you're trying to do as a brewer. And that was the big change is, Montana Craft Malts and Proximity and Gallatin Valley, those guys started listening to what craft wants. And now the barley geneticists are starting to think about flavor and aroma when they're breeding, and less about what's the yield of this going to be, or can it be a dry land variety. And so, we knew it was going to happen once craft got big enough and a big enough part of the market that they had to listen to that consumer, and we're finally there, and it's pretty exciting. So less about variety, more about what are the maltsters doing and listening to craft.
Right, that variety kind of tunes into what grows well in any given place, and then it's up to the maltsters to, and the farming, and then the maltster to make that happen. Let's go back to black IPA, because we've drifted off of that subject. As you then build a, and I should say this is still only a beer you brew once or twice a year. It's not like a constant mainstay, in your stable. as you're brewing, and so these things can change from year to year as you have new ideas and like, hey, let's try this, and so the process of evolution of this is slow, but it also lets us track some of those changes. As you now brew black IPA, what forms the most of your base malt, and then how do you kind of layer in those darker malts on top of that?
Yeah, so we'll make a decision on the base malt, and more and more it can be a pilsner type malt. If we do a pilsner malt, we still kind of bridge the gap. And so what I mean by that is we'll use Vienna. And so we're using Vienna from Gallatin Valley malting. And I think Vienna is maybe the closest continental European inspired malt that is close to, say, a Maris Otter or something along those lines. So we're still trying to make sure there's not a huge cliff to drop off in flavor. We're still trying to build that base. And so if we'll use Pilsner, generally we'll bring in a little bit of Vienna malt to help build that base. And it's not making it completely a Maris Otter based beer, but it's meant to mimic a little bit of that. So, I think you could do a blend of Pilsner malts and something like Golden Promise or Maris Otter. But for black IPA, I think you need a bit of a malt base. Visually, it looks like something that if it's super crisp and clean, it might not make sense. But if you close your eyes, then maybe it does. So, we generally will bring in a little bit of something like Vienna. Dark malts, we are more and more going the Cinnabar route with our black IPA. And the idea there is, we want a mouthfeel, and we want a attenuation that we'll use Pilsner for, but we don't want roastiness. To us, that's more of the Cascadian style and maybe a little more throwback. So, there was a time when IPA was lightening up. We kind of look at that for black IPA too. So, somewhat lighter, let the hops shine, but get it as black as you possibly can. So if there is specialty grains in there, generally it is, again, as a flavor base. So there might be a little bit of, say, low color crystal, generally Simpsons. That's one thing. The U.S. hasn't caught up to Europe on roasted grains yet.
Yeah.
So we're still importing all of that. But, maybe a little bit of caramel, a little bit of low color crystal malts to, again, bridge that gap. But most of that color is either going to come from something dehusked and broadcast over the lauter just during sparging, so as little flavor as possible, or straight up just Cinnabar. Sure.
Well, let's pivot now and talk about hops in black IPA, because this is where, a lot of now we've laid the base. We're going to talk about where some of the magic happens. Before we do that, you like wildly aromatic IPAs and tropical lagers? Good thing Omega designed thiolized yeast for just that reason. Thiolized yeast are a new tool for brewers to bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. And wait, there's more. Omega yeast makes yeast to order with a consistent 1-week lead time, ensuring peak freshness and reliability. Also, keep your brewery running smoothly with 5-star chemicals. Their cleaning solutions are specifically formulated to meet the unique needs of breweries, ensuring that your equipment stays clean and free of harmful bacteria and contaminants. From cleaning fermenters to kegs, they've got a solution for every step of the brewing process. Use 5-star chemicals today and taste the difference in your brews. And ABS Commercial has been a full-service brewery outfitter for over 10 years. They're proud to offer brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and small parts to brewers across the country, as well as equipment for distilling, cider making, wine making, and more. They know the ins and outs of the brewing and installation process and can design the perfect setup for you, whether you're just starting out or looking to expand. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com. to discuss your customized brewery needs. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. So, Mark, hops that work in those lean and pale West Coast or Rocky Mountain IPAs, they get into this kind of context with black IPA or dark IPA or Cascadian Dark Ale, or however we want to call it, or Yellowstonian Dark Ale. That should be a thing.
I like it. Yeah.
Yellowstonian Dark Ale. I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah. Where do you start as you start building hop blends for these beers?
Yeah.
Or for this beer. It's this beer. It is a beer.
So when we first started developing our black IPA, we were really looking at what was working for double IPA and straight IPA at the time. And so hops that were new to us, when I opened Überbrew, the last sexy hop I used was Cascade. And so by the time we opened Überbrew, IPA and hops in general had changed a lot. So we were super excited to get our hands on some things like Simcoe and Citra. And so we always look at kind of the flavor spider plot on a hop, and we look for either synergies where we can lay certain flavors, like say a berry character out of the right Simcoe, and accentuate that with something like Nelson Sauvin. At the time, Nelson was, in one or two beers, and we thought it was neat, but we didn't have any Nelson. So anyway, we look for synergies and either accentuate certain profiles that we're looking at, or we look to round out flavors. And so we utilize spider plots and lay them on top of each other. And, before we did that digitally, we would pin up the spider plots that we'd print out or make ourselves and just put them on the wall and look for that stuff. So we'd kind of map flavors and aromas based on that.
Interesting. And so you will like visually composite some
very much visually at first, and then we can experiment with teas or with other beers. So we start off every new to us hop or a hop that we want to revisit with a smash beer. And so at Überbrew we have the Grandmaster Smash series, and so that's a single malt, single hop, and those beers have changed over the years as to whether it's a session IPA or a hazy session or a double, and but we'll keep it to one malt, one hop, and it's a study for us. It helps us learn and maybe create those plots that we'll then use visually in a beer that we want to learn and then execute. So something like Alpha Force Double Tap started with the Smash series, went into plots, and then there's a visual session where everybody sits there and says, hey, I like this spike of this hop from this beer. What if we layered that into Alpha Force? So
you are brewing a Smash beer, and then your team is going and creating their own flavor plots, not simply taking what the hop broker is saying,
it'll be both, but yes,
okay.
But based off of those hop studies, that Smash series. But there again, it comes back to malt. And so a malt that we're super excited about that came up through the Grandmaster Smash is Chevalier. And we love that hop as a malt as a base for hops, and it's because it has a real jammy or kind of a what's the jam with all the zest in it, a marmalade like character that we're looking for, and so that's something exciting to bring that kind of flavor profile, but coming from malt instead of hops, to maybe accentuate some citrus on a hop. And so even if it's not the hops that we're plotting, in the Smash series, new malts can come as part of that smash.
And I guess that lets you evaluate how, some of that malt character might change, the way with those hops that you may already know.
Absolutely.
You can see the effect of that.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, what tool do you use for your staff? Like, do they just draw it out on some paper?
We'll draw it out. And so, you can have just a piece of paper with those profiles on it. And when you do sensory, you say, this leans citrus or this leans floral. This leans tropical. And, the spider plots, you can go 0 to 5, say. And so it's intensity. And, Wireman does a great job with their malts and spider plots like that. But a lot of hop brokers. And so initially, before we add any of that data, we would rely on hop brokers' spider plots and we still use those and layer ours in. But, we're not big enough to where we're buying our own lots yet. So we oftentimes rely on friends in the industry that say, hey, if you can get your hands on this, I know you guys like this in your Simcoe. This Simcoe's real fruity. Go for that.
This lot that we've got is one that you,
So that's how we approach it. And I think it pays off.
Yeah, so then, as you go through this process, using, understanding what these hops are, layering some of these on top of each other, what are some of those individual flavor spikes, those characters that you find in a hop lend themselves well in a dark IPA that might be a little different than, a typical pale IPA?
So it depends on, if you're using grains to get that or Cinnamar. I think if you use Cinnamar, there's an earthiness there. And if you use too much, you can get an ashy character that we don't care for. But I think Cinnamar gives you freedom to play with the hops a little more. There's less opportunity for something to conflict. But when you go roasty, I think you kind of have to think coffee in some ways. And so we really like Ethiopian coffee because if roasted properly, it can have some real berry-like notes. So for instance, if you want a berry-like note and you get the right Simcoe, you can get great berry character. So let's say you want to accentuate a berry note and you really want to lay down on that. So you can get berry notes out of Nelson Sauvin and you can get berry notes out of things like Hallertau Blanc. And so, for instance, I think those 3 hops together would be an excellent berry accentuated. It's still going to have some of the citrus, and depending on the lot of hops, there might be some diesel or some dank-like characters. But, then you look for synergies like maybe Mosaic and Galaxy. And I think those types of things can be really nice in a black IPA.
Would you have a general, and Alpha Force Double Tap is an imperial black IPA. Given that people expect, roast and some bitterness and some sort of capacity in this dark beer, how do you balance, bitterness, and how do you shape that bitterness so that it's there, but it's not, say, rough or excessively aggressive? Even if it's strong, it should always feel smooth, and it needs to build rather than instantly attack. How do you massage that kind of bitterness through your process?
Sometimes mistakes. So we went through this whole.
At least you're honest.
Yeah, we went through. I think the industry went through a whole period with hazy where there were a lot of beers that had excessive hop burn.
Right.
And I think that kind of came from this idea that if you don't use any hops in the kettle except for whirlpool and dry hopping, that there wouldn't be any excessive bitterness or burn. And I think it gave us the opposite. And so, we kind of had to learn that mistake by doing that. Only going whirlpool and cool pool and dry hop and how come this beer's so harsh? How come there's burn? And it's lingering burn that even with age is there. And what we found is that you have to use some hops in the boil. You have to give that hop, those hop chemicals, something to glom onto, or it'll just be like eating a hop pellet raw. And, we learned that mistake, and we're that brewery that changes one variable at a time. So it creeps along at a very slow pace. And so there were probably a year and a half or so where we had some beers that had some hop burn. And, we learned that you have to get some hops hot side to make sure that you don't have that problem.
What does that hot side hopping now look like for you? You're doing, first wort hops, early stuff. Like, I imagine a lot of the mid boil stuff is still not that prominent.
Right.
What do you do?
So I think, we very first started doing some mash hopping and first wort hopping in the early 2000s.
Good for your style expression too.
So we did it early 2000s with tumbleweed.
So far ahead of the curve on those style things.
And that was the Germans were doing it. And so back then there were papers, but they were in German. And so,
Sure.
with some translating, what the Germans discovered, and they first started using it to kind of use a Reinheitsgebot method of acidifying the mash. And so, if you didn't have acidulated malt and you couldn't add phosphoric or lactic acid, they would use hops to facilitate better runoff and not pulling out astringencies with sparging. And what they discovered is that you had hop flavor and hop aroma that counterintuitively made it through a boil. And so they were researching that a little bit. And so we read some of that and started doing it because, it was early 2000s, and in the 90s, it's how many hops can you throw out a beer in every way that you possibly can. And, we found that the Germans were right. And so Überbrew's kind of always done some first wort hopping and some mash hopping. And at the time, Samuel Adams did a beer with, I think it was Dogfish Head, called Flowers, and they were putting rose petals in brewing liquor. And we were like, well, hops are a flower. Let's throw a bunch of hops in our hot liquor tank. And those were mistakes, but but you learn from them. And so, I think, kettle hopping for us or hot side hopping for us since the 90s has included first wort hopping. We have very hard water here in Billings. And so instead of using acidulated malt, we'll do some of that to maintain pH balance in our mash. And we find that it adds great flavor and aroma. And to your point, we're just starting to learn about thiols and thiol precursors, but we'll continue to experiment and learn on that. But where we're at on the kettle is instead of no hops at the beginning of the boil, we have to use some. And we're finding that kind of eliminates hop burn. Now, they might be small amounts, and to your point, there might not be anything at 40 minutes before the end of the boil, 30, 15. It might come at flame out or in the whirlpool. But to keep hop burn down, we found that we need something 60 minutes in the boil or 90 minutes in the boil, besides what you're doing, mash hopping and first wort hopping.
Interesting. And, again, you're just trying to build this broad spectrum of, of hop flavor, and some of those cooked hop flavors, and aromas are pretty positive and help balance out those things. How about whirlpooling?
So when we designed the brew house for By All Means, we really wanted to be able to cool pool. And so we've been doing more and more of that, and we like it. I wouldn't say that we totally understand it yet, but
what do you mean by that?
Well, how much of just setting a temperature and doing it at that temperature, and how is that translating into what we're tasting and smelling? And so that's what we're learning. So we're doing it. Do we know the outcome yet? We like some of the outcomes. Are we exactly sure what we're doing? No.
What has worked and what have you been less excited about?
So one thing that's worked is backing off on the amount of hops in the whirlpool. The other thing that's worked is, we really went after cryo in the whirlpool for a while. And at first cryo was powder, at least what we got. And that would kind of float on top and you'd have to punch it in. So pellets helped a lot. But just backing off a little bit in the whirlpool and still hitting it hard, dry hopping, but backing off a little bit in the whirlpool.
Is there now like a whirlpool threshold where you're like, this is anything beyond this threshold we know we're not going to get more out of, or it's going to push into unpleasant? Do you have any kind of rules around that, or is it hop specific?
So we kind of look at it of a pound per barrel. And, I'd say that we're probably in the, we've done everything. We've plugged heat exchangers on a lot of collaborations we've done. And, that was well beyond. So, I'd say that right now we're probably in the 2 pounds per barrel whirlpool realm, but, we've done as much as 5 pounds per barrel whirlpool. And that was kind of our thing in Colorado for a long time, is we were plugging our collaborative breweries heat exchangers all the time, and that wasn't too much fun, but we did like some of the product that we got out of it. 2 pounds per barrel probably
keeps you in a safer place. So let's talk about dry hopping then. And I assume fermentation on a black IPA is just going to be a standard California ale yeast, or do you have any more special approaches to it?
I'm not a California ale yeast
guy.
I never have been.
Really?
So we discovered, with the hard water we have in Billings, back in Montana Brewing Company in the 90s, we switched to London Ale 3 a long time ago, and that's been my house yeast ever since. We're pretty excited about some of the Kvike, but for us, it's 2 yeast strains. We like Ondex and we like London Ale 3.
So you're making clear beer with London Ale 3.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you can make very lager clean beers with London Ale 3 too, and it'll ferment cool. So you got to overpitch and ferment cool, but you can make a cream ale with London Ale 3 and it tastes just like you used Ondex.
Learning something new every day. Man, you're way ahead on this London Ale 3 trend. And you're right there when hazy became such an in thing.
Yeah. And it works great for haze, but we aren't really looking for permanent haze out of yeast. We're looking at that as being a malt and hop synergy, or lack thereof.
Sure. So then dry hopping for black IPA, what's that like for you?
So we have kind of tried everything under the sun. We generally like fermentation temperature. For us, London Ale's on the low end, so I'm going to say in the 62 degree Fahrenheit range. So we pitch more than a lot of people probably do.
Yeah.
But we like to dry hop at fermentation temperature and 2 days and pull them and do a second dry hop. And so we don't like too much time on the hops. And we like to be at fermentation temperature. Sometimes we'll raise temp a little bit. It depends on hops you're using. If they tend to be hops like, say, a Mosaic that tends towards hop creep or something, sometimes we'll raise temperature there to help push through some of that. That's kind of the beauty of cold IPA and krausening and spunding, is to help speed up some of that creep. And so we're really into some of those techniques that like Wayfarer and those guys have come up. So cold IPA is kind of a cool thing we're playing with now.
Making more and more of it these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. They taste good too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Well, is there anything else to black IPA that I have not brought up on this one? Because we've been talking for a good hour here already, and I haven't even talked about wheat beer yet.
I think the biggest thing is the donut effect.
The donut effect.
So I think if you use all cryo, there's something missing. There's a hole in your beer. And so you need some of that plant material.
Yeah.
It can't all be just concentrated. And so we like using lots of different hop products. So we've done all cryo beers, but they're missing something.
In addition to cryo, any use of flowable hop products?
Not for us.
Okay.
I know they're getting better, and I know there's some exciting stuff, but hop extracts from the 90s left a bad aroma to me, and I haven't been able to get over it. It'll come, but like I said, we're one variable at a time brewery, so we're kind of slow.
Fair enough. Well, let's switch some gears and talk about American wheat. Again, another subject that we don't talk about much here on the podcast. And this, beer that you make, White Noise, that as you mentioned before, is something that you'd made earlier versions of for, all of your career, and has been basically a career-long labor of love for you. Talk to me about where it started and where it is now, if I'm going to borrow the terms from that popular meme.
Yeah. So for me, it started homebrewing. So about 91 or so. The first 2 years I homebrewed, I essentially made two recipes, a brown ale and at the time Bavarian style wheat beer. And I still today love Bavarian style, but the market in Montana is for American style wheat beers, whether it be a Vit or, a Hefeweizen type. They don't necessarily like Belgian or German yeast strains as much here in Montana. So there's kind of two styles of beer you have to make, three if you include IPA. And that's an Americanized wheat beer of some sort, and Scotch ale, and of course IPA. But so at Montana Brewing Company, we started with an American Hefeweizen. And at the time, Widmer was a big deal, but they might have been a big deal for their alt beer. And Widmer Hefeweizen came on, and it was popular here in Montana. And so we wanted to make something that we thought maybe we could improve on a little bit, and something that the locals could get excited about. And so, that 2 years of brewing Bavarian style Weiss beer, we just adapted, and originally we were using I think it was Weiss 1332 or something along those lines, and very early on went to London Ale 3 and discovered that it was a great wheat beer yeast, and you could get lots of different flavors. And if you underpitch that yeast and stress it a little bit, you can get some Bavarian Weiss beer type character out of it if you want to. Very mild, but so maybe our wheat beers early on were kind of a hybrid. Now we've gone clean, so we ferment cool, overpitch. In a lot of ways, it's maybe more like a wheat lager or something from a flavor standpoint. Obviously not genetically, but yeah. So meant to be a thirst quencher. I'm really big on Michael Jackson's Beer for Occasion, and whenever we brew something, we start with the intent. Is it a thirst quencher? Is it a light, medium, dark, or hoppy sociable beer? Is it an aperitif? Is it a digestif? Is it a party greeting? Is it a restorative? And beer can be made for all of those occasions, and so that's the first part of a recipe. So Montanans are very active, and we think thirst quenchers are important, and I think that's why American versions of wheat beer are so popular here in Montana, is they're looking for those thirst quenchers for their active lifestyle.
Interesting. And so then walk me through it. When you, as you build this beer that needs to be a thirst quencher, how do you design it to be that way?
So we again start with malts.
Yep. It's a wheat beer. It's going to have some wheat malt in
What's
it.
a little bit counterintuitive is we maybe use a little less wheat malt than, say, you would in a Bavarian style Hefeweizen. So if we're in the 40% wheat range, so 40% wheat, 60% barley, that's more of what we do. And in Bavarian, it would be flip-flopped. We look for high attenuation. So, at Überbrew, we're single-step infusion mashes, so we're going low 149. No ability to do any upward infusion or anything, so there's no protein rest and then move up to saccharification temperature. It's just a low saccharification temperature, and so dry is what we're looking for. In almost every other way, it would be a traditional wheat beer. So low IBU. Generally speaking, it's going to use noble type varieties, although we really like Liberty. That might be a problem in years to come because nobody else really uses Liberty.
Yeah.
But we think it's the closest to, say, middle fruit of the haploid sisters of U.S. We've used everything in the past. We've used German hops. We've used North American hops, but Liberty's floral, noble, but it's got a little more lemony-like character to it that we really like. So, simple beer. You can't hide behind it, so everything's got to be clean. Everything's got to be well executed, but hopefully it's one that you can quench that thirst and you get done with the ride or run or mowing the lawn or chasing the kids around, whatever it is that you need a thirst quencher for.
Yeah.
That's what we're making it for.
Where's the line then between, more European, is it this, your wheat beers and this Americans? Is it just, this cleaner, lower fruit character, less of that kind of, obviously almost none of that clove or banana character that might come out of a, Bavarian style Weiss beer. Where are those lines for you, and how do you describe, how that should taste?
I think, for malt, we're looking for more continental
just the very
type.
faintest of the banana character,
Yeah.
but just very, very faint.
And that's kind of, we pitch less London Ale 3 in this beer than any other beer we make with that yeast strain. But again, I think it starts with grain. We're looking for grassiness or more continental European style. So this used to be all Weyermann Pils, and now we're using Montana Craft Malt as the base malt, and it's got a real grassy note too. So that plays well with the hops. For the yeast, like you say, we'll stress it a little bit and try and coax a little bit of isoamyl acetate out of it, a little bit of banana, but not too much. I think when you're looking for a thirst quencher, these have an edge on some of the Bavarian or Belgian style, in that some of those esters and some of those fruity characters, or, if you get into clove with Belgian, they can be a bit cloying and a little sweeter, and so it's not as quenching. And we're looking for quenching. So high attenuation and not too much yeast character.
Where does it finish in terms of gravity?
So we like it to finish below 2 degrees Plato, and that's sometimes coaxing the yeast. Originally London Ale 3 was a high flocculating strain. It's kind of changed a little bit over the years. They talk about it being medium and medium low now, but it used to be one of those that you used to have to kind of fluff and try and keep in solution so that you could achieve a diacetyl rest or something like that. It wasn't as bad as, say, like Fuller's ESB or something that was so flocculent that it's almost impossible to do a diacetyl rest. But it was a close second when we first started using it. It adapts, I'd say, to a cylindroconical fermenter in about 2 generations. And so we almost always, when we're doing a new pitch, we do it on white noise. And so it hasn't quite adapted to the cylindroconical yet. And maybe it acts a little different. And I think that's why you get a little bit of that banana too.
So you then use white noise, to
Keep our
grow
yeast
up
going.
more of the yeast that you will then kick into these other beers that you also.
Absolutely.
Well, smart production strategy. Talk to me about the wheat malt component of this. Obviously, that's an important piece of a wheat beer.
Yeah, so that just changed recently. Within the last 3 years, we went from Wireman white wheat to Gallatin Valley Malting's white wheat malts. And, we started using some of their base malts first. And whenever they come out with something new.
Clearly didn't hurt its medal winning,
right?
Because you won silver in 21 and then gold in 2022.
It took a lot of using those malts for by all means before we said, let's go ahead and try them.
Because that's a bold thing to take this, consistently medal winning beer and say, we're just going to change, the wheat malt in our medal winning wheat beer.
So some of what helped us with that was contract brewing. And so when we were working with Sleeping Giant in Denver, they were using some different malts in their silo than what we have. And, they would use a hammer mill and they would do a filter press. And we had a really hard time telling the difference between our beers in blind sensory and what we were making here in Billings. And so that got us thinking about, they were using some Malt Europe Pilsen malt grown here in Montana. And so that got us thinking about, okay, let's start looking at some of the Montana malts. And we got to play with them by all means. And we liked what we saw, so we started applying those to Überbrew recipes. We were doing that a little bit with Sleeping Giant, but here in our own house, we started applying them to Überbrew recipes. And we liked the results. And, I think the only way we knew in sensory is if we knew a little something going in. But if we had to pick, we probably couldn't accurately pick the difference between Wireman and what we were using here in Montana. So we've made the conversion for some of those beers.
That's something. And so, the idea is to keep the flavor the same.
Absolutely.
The idea is not to find something more or less flavorful. It's to try to match it exactly, and you're there.
Especially with the flagship like that, yeah.
Yeah. And I like that idea that grassiness, that's that malt character that seems to work, and kind of obviously because there's not a ton of hops in this beer.
No.
It's, and so some of that character then comes from the malt itself.
Yeah. So earlier iterations, so like Whitetail Wheat at Montana Brewing Company, very similar beer, different malts, but different hops back then too. We were using Centennial a lot, and we'd get this real, almost like strawberry yogurt like character. And forever, we thought that was coming out of London Ale 3 somehow. And we finally figured out that it was Centennial. And
strawberry
the way
yogurt.
we were using it, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Careful. Some people may want to make more strawberry yogurt beers now.
Right.
So, then in terms of fermentation, you mentioned that, this one is under pitch, but then, also still kind of, a cool fermentation with London Ale 3, making an American wheat beer with London Ale 3. It's just, fascinating to see how you do it. Anything else that, any of the other, kind of things you pay attention to through this fermentation process to get that kind of character that you want in the wheat beer?
We don't go too heavy on the haze on this, and there's a little bit of yeast haze. So one of the biggest things that we struggled with contract brewing was finishing this beer. It was almost always more clear than what we were looking for. And so we would really work with, at the time, Fort Collins Brewing and with Sleeping Giant on centrifugation. And theoretically, we knew that you could get a nice stable haze with centrifugation. But we didn't have our own centrifuge, so we couldn't exactly tell anybody how to accomplish that. And now we have it here at By All Means, and we get to play with it every day. And Fridays are centrifugation day. So Kyler's centrifuging now, yeah. But we're excited about it because we like it for clear beers and we like it for hazy beers. And so we're finally understanding white noise with centrifugation. And, you know, generally speaking, it's about, you know, the bowl speed and the throughput speed. And so you can speed up the bowl and slow down the throughput for a clear beer, and you can do the opposite for a hazy beer. And that we're playing with white noise on that and getting it where we want it. I think we'd like to turn the beer a little faster than what we're doing, but you know, you used to hear the stories about Widmer and it being 8 days from brew kettle to packaging. And I don't know that we'll do it with white noise, but we'd like to play with that idea.
So if I'm reading between the lines, you think the centrifugation is probably creating a little more of a stable haziness in the beer then?
And, you know,
and it's very
a
light,
little
light
less haze. Okay. Yeah, I think.
But it's not going to drop clear now.
It doesn't settle in the keg if the keg sit around. Even if it sits in the fermenter or the packaging tank longer, it's a more stable haze. To your point, it doesn't settle out. We used to play around with keeping kegs upside down and things like that, you know. But sometimes,
but if that centrifuge can pull out some of those larger particles that might pull the haze out of there, then you know, it does tend to keep a little bit more of that in a consistent way.
And I can't tell you how many times that beer has been in a metal round, but has said not hazy enough. So
sure.
You know, working on that aspect of it, and you know, you get to choose if you want the stewards to rouse or pour gently, and you know, we would print our own labels in big red letters on a white background that says rouse vigorously or something, in hopes that we would, and we don't have to do that anymore. So
fair enough. Well, Mark, are there any other brewing subjects that you know, things that you guys have been playing around with and learning from, experimenting with, that you know, that you found either counterintuitive, interesting, or that have kind of sparked some additional lines of inquiry for you?
Well, we're loving playing with Kvike. So, you know, we play with the Farmhouse series with By All Means, and so we think of farmhouse as not necessarily being Belgian. You know, there are farmhouses
making farms over here in Montana
making great beer all over the world. And so we like this idea of some of the Norse farmhouse type beers, and maybe playing with hybrids and coming up with new ideas based on that.
What's a Montana farmhouse beer look like?
So, you know, for us, we think about it as, what do you have readily available? And to a brewer in the modern world, do you have anything available to you? And so we like playing with stuff like Bloody Butcher corn and you know, some of the Carolina rye, and so it kind of starts with an interesting malt from an interesting maltster, like Riverbend or Gallatin Valley, and then playing with those yeasts and understanding them more. And so we really like Sigmund Voss. We really like Lutra, and you know, we like this idea of Kvike rings and maybe those yeasts being the original dry yeast. So that's fun. We'll do a few of those every year. We, of course, like wood. You know, when we got to go to California and play cornhole at Lenny Colado, we hit it off with those guys, and they sent us some barrels as a housewarming gift for this. And so love wine barrels. Those are the things we're playing with and having fun with. But I love Pilsner.
Sure. You've got some side pull taps right here in the By All Means tap room. And
so, you know, we brew as many pilsners as we can throughout the year, and we finally did a German one, and we've got a lot to learn, but it's fun learning.
For sure. In the big picture, what do you hope to accomplish with By All Means and with Überbrew? What's next in your career, and where do you hope all of this goes? You've been in this brewing game for a really long time now. You've watched it go through lots of changes. You have always taken a progressive and embracing approach to the new things coming along in the brewing world. For a brewer that was, brewing in the mid 90s, you could have easily hated on hazy IPA, and yet
love them.
You love them, and you try to figure them out. And you try to, how to figure out how to make them better or make them your own. And so you've always taken that kind of, progressive approach to these things. What's next? What do you hope for these brands to become? And and what's the big picture goal here?
So to keep experimenting and doing what we love and have the opportunity to do it, and that's the right business model, but a market that is accepting and wanting those things. But for us, it is probably the collaborative part, and I think COVID nixed some of that, and I think the industry needs to get back to it. I know that's what I miss most. I know that's what I've enjoyed the most over the years, because I think the best way to learn is for people to talk and collaborate. And Montana, especially Billings, Montana, can be a bit of an island, and so it's really cool to get out and work with other brewers that are sharing those same visions and goals. And I think that's the best way to learn, whether it's what you want to do or what you might not want to do. But that's what this industry was created on. And I think if it's going to keep moving forward, we need to get back to that. We're all in it together. We're all working on making it something bigger than it is together. And so I hope to do some collaborations soon.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts, on brewing with this broader podcast, collaborative brewing world that we are a part of. Certainly appreciate you being a part of it too. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Carry Firm Cap Eco. Check it out from BSG. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends in your next craft beverage. AccuBrew gives you unprecedented insight into the fermentation process. ProBrew's rotary can fillers reduced waste and produce higher quality packaged beer. RMS roller grinder mills unlock the full potential of your grain. Omega's stylized yeasts bring intensive guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. Keep your brewery running smoothly with 5-star chemicals. ABS Commercial is your full-service brewery outfitter. If you enjoyed this podcast and any others, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, and please, 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 support all of our forays here into media so we can continue bringing this podcast and all of our other media and publications to you. If you want to, come up and check out By All Means and Überbrew here in Billings and want to plan a trip around it, go to visitbillings.com and start planning your trip there. Mark, if people want to learn more about By All Means and about Überbrew, where do they learn more about you all?
You can go to our web pages. You can reach out to me direct. I'm Mark at byallmeans.beer. If you want the long tour when you come see us, ask for me. I'll talk your socks off.
It's been fun to finally get up here after all of these years and after talking to you about brewing for so much time. Greatly appreciate you making some time for me this morning, and I'm looking forward to hanging out a bit more while I'm up here in Billings. Cheers, Mark.
Cheers. Thank you, Jamie. You are definitely our lifeline to what goes on in the industry here on the island, and we really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that too. Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.